As we know, there's a controversy raging in Israel as we speak about the conversion reforms. Thank you, Eli, for correcting me. Eli set me straight a little bit on how the law works. I didn't say it correctly. Basically, what Matan Khan, the Minister of Religious Affairs, is trying to reform that currently, in order for the government to recognize a gerus that has two nafkaminas, one nafkamina is so that the state could recognize their marriage. The rabbin, the state won't marry a Jew with a non-Jew. So if a person goes through gerut, goes through conversion, if the government's or the rabbinate is going to marry them off, they will have to recognize their conversion. And the other nafkamina, the other practical difference is for the right of return. Every Jew has the entitlement to be granted entry and citizenship in Israel. Okay, so what it was basically until now, the rabbinate had, or it still is this way. It's been this way since the founding of the state. The rabbinate has a monopoly on. The rabbinate has a monopoly on conversion. Only they can decide who is a convert and who isn't. I mean, there were controversies in the past because the Tzahal, the rabbinate of the IDF held a little bit of a more liberal standard than the general rabbinate. But basically, what the new reforms would say is that anybody who has the way I'll explain to you, that anybody who has the status of a Rav Ir, okay, is officially recognized by the state as being the Rav of a city, he will have the right to do gerus, a conversion, according to his stance that he chooses. Okay, and there are a lot of rabbinic bodies today that want to convert what they call Misorti, Gir Misorti. That's what the Eliezer Melamed from Har Bracha wrote an article in the Besheva saying that, trying to argue in favor of Gir Misorti, that if somebody's not going to be Misorti, what is Misorti? A traditional Jew, that should be good enough to convert the person. Then Shmuel Eliyahu wrote back, and then a whole bunch of Rabbanim wrote back to the Besheva saying that there's no such thing. So let's just look at the sugi again. Number one on your reference sheet, the Gemara Nivamas, Daf Mem Zayin, says it explicitly, Tzarech for Kabbalah of all mitzvahs, so the Ger needs to accept upon himself the yoke of the mitzvahs. Okay? Number two in your reference sheet, in the Gillas Rus, this will be reading when Shavuos comes along.Nomi's trying to discourage Rus from becoming a Giyore. Rus is very adamant that she wants to become Jewish. So she says, Amech Hamiyah, that involved, my nation is your nation, your God is my God. Okay? So says the Gemara Nivamas Daf Mem Zayin on the base. What does it mean, Amech Hamiyah? Says the Gemara, I put it in bold, Maftinim Sheish mitzvahs were commanded to observe 613 mitzvahs. So to that, Rus responded, Amech Ami, my nation is your nation. So this might come as a surprise to somebody because Amech Ami, what does that have to do with mitzvahs? If anything, you should have said, Elohai, your God is my God. That seems to relate more to mitzvahs. Amech Ami. Sorry?
She actually did say that.
Yeah, she said, Elohai Elohai. But the Gemara interprets the words Amech Ami as a response to Naomi telling Rus, you have to keep 613 mitzvahs. So on jump number 6 in your reference sheet, the Sefer Munas Vadeus says there upside you going, Umatenu, the definition of our nationhood, Einena Uma Ki Torah, it's by our Torah. The Torah defines our nation, which that explains very nicely why when Naomi said you have to keep 613 mitzvahs, Rus said Amech Ami. Right? Because the identity of our nationhood is based on our observance of the 613 mitzvahs. Okay, number 4 in your reference sheet, Daf Mem Zayin, again in Yavamas, I just put the sections in bold just to get the key points. To inform the candidate for Geiros about some of the more severe, some of the more stringent commands and the more lenient commands, and then in the end, what does he need to do? Kibo, if he accepts upon himself to do these mitzvahs, then you do bris milah right away. Okay? The Gemara says he can bris milah, he needs to go into the bris milah, and the Gemara says for a second time he needs to be mekabel all mitzvahs. So what is the second time that he has to accept upon himself? And mitzvahs right before his tefillah, right before his immersion in the mikvah. Madina is in mitzvahs, Mrs. Kalas, Mrs. Chamuras, he needs to have another kabbalas all mitzvahs at the time of his immersion in the mikvah. Says Rashi, why? Why does he need to do it again? So Rashi explains that the tefillah, the immersion is going to clinch the gerus, is going to clinch the conversion. So therefore he needs to accept upon himself the mitzvahs once again, which means to say we need to know that he actually is accepting upon himself the yoke of mitzvah at the actual time when he's going to become Jewish. That's why he does the Kabbalah mitzvahs another time again. Right? So I quoted the Shut Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer also sees something very, very significant about the fact that Sadi Goyen said that our nation is only defined by observance of the 613 mitzvahs. The Tzitz Eliezer says, Hagdara Muftid Zot Shal Rasag Nosed B'chov Asod Kol Torah Kim Kum Kumasei. This one phrase basically contains the entire underlying secret to our survival, our most defining aspect, okay? So that's basically very clear that we need to have the Makabel all mitzvahs. So what did Rabbi Lazar Lamed mean? He probably maintains that if somebody agrees to become a Masarti, presumably he's going to observe some of the mitzvahs, and there's a chance that he might observe all the mitzvahs. He's already agreeing to identify himself as a Jew. So, according to him, I presume that's good enough to be all mitzvahs.
Under the most stringent regulations, based on what we see here, is it required that the ger be mekayim all the mitzvahs before tefillah? No.
No, you don't have to inform all the mitzvahs. There's mixes. So
he technically could still be
Jewish, even if he's not even aware of all the mitzvahs.
Correct.
Exactly. Like we're going to soon see in the Gemara in Shabbos, where Hillel was Magayer somebody, even though he only accepted upon himself the Torah Shabbat Sadi, he didn't accept upon himself the Torah Shabbat Peh. Okay? So part number 2, the Gemara in Crucis Daf Tes. This is a very important Gemara. I didn't put it in the reference sheet last week. I was extremely busy on that Wednesday, so my apologies to make sure aren't as clear as they usually are. The Gemara Crucis Daf Tes on Al is a very important Gemara. I put it in bold. Did anybody ever ask himself, a ger, he has to do bris milah, he needs to immerse himself in a mikvah, when the base of mikvah is standing, he needs to bring a carbon. Did we ever ask ourselves, how do we know that? What's the source for that? So the Gemara says it's actually learned from the experience at Sinai. Just as your forefathers did not go into the covenant with anything else other than milah, tefillah and ourselves done, bris milah, immersion in a mikvah and a carbon, so the ger, what he's really doing is he's renewing the experience at Sinai. He's doing whatever we did to become Jewish at Sinai, he has to do the same thing. So he's having his own personal experience at Sinai, if you'd like. Now, a basic idea, Brit means a covenant. How does a covenant work? A covenant is an agreement between two people that if A does X, Y, Z, then B will do something else. In other words, it's a mutual agreement that the two sides have to keep. They have an obligation to each other. Like, Brit Hanisuim, they call it the covenant of marriage, because a husband commits certain things to the wife commits certain things to the husband, so that's what a bris is. Now, if you read the Gemara carefully, it says, bris, they didn't enter the covenant by anything other than by means of bris milah, by means of tefillah, and by means of a carbon when the base of mikdash is standing. So what is the actual covenant? In other words, what are we committed, and what way are we committed to Hashem, and in what way is Hashem committed to us? First of all, let's put that question on hold. The Rambam in Hilchos Yisur B'Yachim Gimel Halach Aleph is very interesting that the Rambam, where does he talk about Hilchos Gerus and Hilchos Yisur B'Yachim, forbidden relations? If anybody has an idea why the Rambam put Hilchos Gerus in Hilchos Yisur B'Yachim, it's something to think about. I find it curious. I would have expected the Rambam to put in Hilchos Malachim, but he didn't. Okay. So the Rambam is a book of halachos. Okay, very often the Rambam, the Mefarshim very often ask if the Rambam says something doesn't seem to be halachic in nature, zagadic in nature. They'll say there must be some nafkamina, there must be some halachic import if the Rambam is mentioning this. So the Rambam is saying that when the Jewish people became Jews at Sinai, they entered the covenant with milah, tefillah, and carbon. The Rambam is a history book. Right? Why is the Rambam? In Hanukkah, the Rambam tells us the whole story of Hanukkah. So Rav Soloveitchik, I'm getting off on a tangent, Rav Soloveitchik asks, why is the Rambam telling us the history? Because so he wanted to say as follows, Rav Soloveitchik. He said, the Rambam wrote as Hakdama that you only need my book and the Torah Shebachsav. A person is in an island, if he has the Torah Shebachsav, the written Torah in the book of the Rambam, he has everything he needs. But since right? The Chacham were mad not to put the story of Hanukkah. They didn't make a Maseches for Hanukkah. They didn't say the whole story. So they weren't so clear about what we're celebrating. So if you don't have a Gemara, because the Rambam said you can have this book without a Gemara, you wouldn't know the story of Hanukkah. So you wouldn't know what you're celebrating. So the Rambam had to put it in. Okay. That's what we're celebrating, what to say. But anyways, why is the Rambam mentioning this and how we became Jewish? It seems to be history. So I think the Rambam is actually saying something very significant. Look at number 10 in your reference. You can Shmais. At Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, I want you to relay the following message. Ushmartem et briti, you have to safeguard my covenant or observe my covenant. And then you're going to be a chosen nation. So how did we become the Jewish people? How did we become the Jewish nation? Ushmartem et briti, we have to safeguard the actual covenant. What is the covenant? Not Brit Milah. Brit Milah is an oath Brit. The Brit Milah is a testament to the covenant, but it's not the actual covenant itself. The Tefillah is not the actual covenant, right? The Baptists go to the mikvah all the time. That's not the actual covenant. So says Rashi, Shmartem et briti, she'ach v'timachem al shmirat Torah. The covenant is that we'll observe the Torah. This is Rashi's idea is also mentioned in the Medrash, number 12 in your reference sheet says the Medrash, Ushmartem et briti, zu klal kol Torah. That covenant is the observance of the Torah, because it said the Yikach Sefer Bris, Shmais Chav Daled Zayin. How is the Sefer Torah described? The Torah is described Sefer HaBrit, the book of the covenant, because in order for us to observe the covenant, we need to observe the mitzvahs. So we have the book of the covenant, the book that tells us how we go about observing the covenant. Okay? So what do the people say in response? Number 13, Shmei says, according to most Mefarshim, Nasa v'Nishma actually happened after Har Sinai. Rashi learns that Nasa v'Nishma was, even though Nasa v'Nishma appears at the end of Mishpatim. Okay, according to most of the Rishonim, the Ramban and almost all the other Rishonim, when they said Nasa v'Nishma, it was in reference to all the different mitzvahs that were delineated in Parshas Mishpatim. Okay, but before Matan Torah, that everybody agrees, they said, so what did we do at Sinai? What was maybe the most significant act as a lead up to Sinai? That we undertook to observe the mitzvahs. So now Ger, right, we understand why he needs to take upon his mitzvahs, because he does tefillah, he does meat, he does carbon, these are things that happen at Sinai, but he also has to say that I'm going to do whatever Hashem has commanded me to do. So this idea is very eloquently expressed in the Shub Zecher Yitzchak, number 14 on the reference sheet. Mila b'tefillah ain't min po'el ha'gerus. Mila b'tefillah is not the actual making of the covenant. The bris Mila is to purify from the impurity of being uncircumcised. But tefillah and the immersion of Tari Tumas Akum is to be purified from being a non-Jew, because without these means, without these preparations, a person can't become ger. What's the essential conversion? The essential conversion is Kabbalah Samitzvah Slavad, is the actual accepting of the mitzvahs. Okay? So, by the way, I would add that it's not just, I would add that the definition is not complete. Bris Milah is not just to purify from the impurity of being uncircumcised, it's also an ot bris. It stands as a testament to the covenant. When a person sees his bris milah, he's supposed to be reminded that he has 613 mitzvahs to observe. Okay? He's supposed to be reminded of the covenant that we have to observe the mitzvahs. And what's Hashem's side of the covenant? Vitem li segula, or Malachas Kahanim v'Goy Kadosh, Vatim Til Malachas Kahanim v'Goy Kadosh, that we're going to be a chosen nation. We're going to be a nation of priests. We're going to be a holy nation, right? So if somebody does the bris milah, he does the tefillah, he even brings the carbon if the base of Mikdash was standing, but if he didn't really accept upon himself the mitzvahs, so what kind of covenant is that? What is the bris milah that he has? What's it testifying to? He hasn't even committed to doing the mitzvahs. So, right, so what do you say? He will identify as a Jew, but that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says Shmartim is brisi. What's the definition of the bris? Ashmer Satar, to observe the mitzvahs. Right? So in other words, let's take it another step further. Number 15 on the reference sheet, Bukhari is not Lamed on the base. A non-Jew would like to become Jewish, and he says, I'm going to become Jewish chutz midavar echad, with the exception of one thing, and makabel so you don't accept it. Okay? So even if he refuses to accept upon himself some sort of rabbinic prohibition. She says, a stringency of the rabbis. Okay? The Rambam rules us in the Surabia, now the question is, if somebody wants to become a ger, right? We won't accept him if he says, I'll keep everything except for one mitzvah. But what if he did? Is it b'diavad gerus or not? Obviously it's not ideal to accept him as a convert if he refuses to accept a certain mitzvah. What if he did? So the Shutzi asked this question and proves in the Gemara, according to the Chayra, put it in bold, according to the Gemara Zara, is a ger toshav. We have a ger tzedek, somebody who, for most intents and purposes, is a full-fledged Jew. He's called a ger tzedek. But you have a ger toshav. A ger toshav is a righteous Gentile that is given the right to settle in the land. We have a mitzvah to support him. We have a mitzvah to help him out when he's in a situation of need. So what's a ger toshav? So according to the Chayrin, he keeps everything except for kosher. He says, I'll keep everything, but kosher consumption is something that's not for me. So he's a ger toshav. So what do you see? And even if somebody was genuinely accepted to observe all the mitzvahs, he really did, but he says kosher consumption is not something that I could accept upon himself. He doesn't have the status of a ger tzedek. He only has the status of a ger toshav. He's allowed to settle in the land, but he's still a Gentile. He's a righteous Gentile, but he doesn't have the status of being Jewish. That's what the Beis Yitzchak in your ideas in the base of coffee with the bowl section came in the day. Okay, so basically what we see, what the Beis Yitzchak proves, is that this fellow who observed everything except for kosher consumption, if that was the condition under which he went into his gerut, he's not a ger tzedek, but he's a ger toshav. So you see, you can't become Jewish if, even with the evidence, you can't become Jewish if you went into the whole business with a stipulation that you're not going to keep a certain mitzvah. Okay? Number 19 in the reference sheet, the ger needs three. In other words, in order for you to effect a gerut, a conversion, there has to be a panel of three Jews, or three judges. Right? Rashi says Mishpat Sidbei. Where does it say Mishpat in the context of conversion? Mishpat Echad Yeh Lachem V'Lager Be'ein Mishpatachas Migimel. It says Mishpat Echad Yeh Lachem V'Lager. According to the simple understanding of the pasuk, it means that we observe the same mitzvahs that a ger observes. But a midrashic interpretation is that when you make a ger, it has to be like a mishpat, right? Like a judgment. When they issue a judgment, there has to be a panel of three judges. So therefore, when you make a ger, there has to be three judges. Says Taisus, when you need three, it's only when you accept upon yourself the mitzvahs. Okay? Why did this become an issue? Taisus gets into the issue. The Gemara says if a woman's becoming a convert, she can't chas v'shalom have men present when she goes to the mikvah. So what do? They stand outside the room. Okay? They're outside the room, they don't see her at all. So how could she do the gerus? Right? Don't you need to have a panel of three judges? Right? So Taisus says, no, when do you need three judges? Only when they accept the mitzvahs. When they don't accept the mitzvahs, you don't need to have a panel of three judges, the Diavad. The Rosh says the same thing. The Rosh Perdalit and Laman Aleph and Yavamas. How they begin Shloisha, when you need three handle Kabbalahs and mitzvahs, that's only when they undertake the mitzvahs. So what's the explanation here?
The Kabbalah's mitzvahs is before the tefillah.
That's right. The Kabbalah's mitzvahs is before the tefillah. She has to do Kabbalah's mitzvahs right before she's tefillah. So they understand outside, they don't see her, and through they speak loud enough so that you could hear them speaking, and they tell her you need to observe kosher, you need to observe Shabbos. They tell her the basic mitzvahs that you'll need to observe, and then she says, she tells the woman that's in the room, she says, I accept it upon myself, and they don't see her. Okay? So the Gemara, this is the way the Shach rules. The Shach is look at the wording of the Shach. This is very, very key. Kabbalah's hamitzvahs on the kibbutz fnei shloish. If she didn't do the Kabbalah's all mitzvahs, or if the man did not do Kabbalah's all mitzvahs, afil b'di'at ma'akev, it totally disqualifies the gerus.
He doesn't do it in front of
exactly. In other words, not only does the Kabbalah's all mitzvahs, is it essential for the gerus to be valid, even if he didn't do it in front of three people, it's not valid. But the tefillah, the milah, is not essential to be done in front of three. What's the difference? So it's very understood, right? We saw in the Zer Yitzchak that the act of gerus is the Kabbalah's own mitzvah, so that's why it needs to be done in front of three. The milah and the tefillah are only means to achieve the gerus, or the preparations for the gerus, so that's why it doesn't need to be done in front of three. The pasuk says mishpat echad yelachem. There's one mishpat, says Rashi, that's gerus, so therefore only the essential act of gerus, which is accepting upon yourself the mitzvahs, that needs to be done in front of three. Okay? Now we'll get to number 25 of the reference sheet, 24 of the reference sheet. Okay, If you have a family that would like to become Jewish and they're young children, and now a person is not until he reaches the age of maturity. Until he reaches the age of 13, he's not mature enough, or he doesn't have the legal capacity to accept upon himself all mitzvahs. So what are we supposed to do? So the parents will title him, and then when he reaches the age of maturity, if he protests and he says, I don't want to be Jewish, then he retroactively revokes the entire gerus. But if he doesn't say anything, he's assumed to be Jewish. Gemara says, how could you do that? You're allowed to do something for somebody else's benefit without his knowledge. So the Gemara says, who says it's a benefit for him to become Jewish? Maybe he refers it to be non-Jewish. It's much more restricted to be Jewish. Gemara says, if he grows up as an adult and he gets used to living the lifestyle of a non-Jew, he gets used to eating pork and doing all sorts of things that are asur, right? So he might not want to become Jewish, but a child, before he got into the habit of doing things that are asur, it's assumed that a child will be happy to become Jewish unless he protests. When he reaches the age of maturity, he could protest. So the Gemara is looking for a proof to support Rav Huna's idea that if a family comes to be Megayah, or if there's no parents, or if there's only a father and a mother, or the parents are not present, then the Beis Din could be Megayah. So the Gemara is looking for a source. So asks the Ritva, why do you need a source? Look at Sinai. At Sinai, there were many young children who became Jewish, correct? So you see that you can make a child Jewish. If all the children at Sinai became Jewish, right, then presumably a ger, again, this reinforces the idea that we said before. What a ger is really doing is he's going through the motions of Sinai once again. So if children were able to become Jewish at Sinai, so a family that wants to become Jewish, you can make the children Jewish as well. That's the question of the Ritva. So the Ritva, in his second answer, says, "Ve'ein el gemarus." No. When we became Jewish at Sinai, it was the completion of the gerus. Unlike a non-Jew today who becomes Jewish, it's a complete gerus. So all the Mefarshim ask on the Ritva, what do you mean gemar gerus? What's the difference between our conversion at Sinai and when a non-Jew becomes Jewish? Why is what we experience at Sinai only called the gemar gerus, the completion of the gerus? So Naftali Trapp, who's the Rosh Hashiva in Radin under the Chavetz Chaim, quotes the Ramban in Vayikra Perek Abdal Pasuk. What does it say in Vayikra? The story, Parshas Emor. We're going to be actually reading this. Well, this week is Tezri Mitzara, Achri Mos Kedosh Emor. Okay, it's coming up soon. So Parshas Ben Ish Yisraelis, Ish Mitzri. You had this fellow whose mother was Jewish. His mother was a Yisraelis. His father was an Ish Mitzri. His father was an Egyptian. Besides Bnei Yisrael, he went in the midst of the Jewish people. Aschi says from the Medrash that he was arguing about territory. The Yinotza B'machna, he got into a fight with somebody. Bnei Yisrael, Isha Yisraeli. What happened? He cursed, and then Moshe didn't know what to do with him, and then eventually they executed him. So Ramban quotes the Medrash. Okay, Ramban there on the Torah quotes the Medrash. The Torah's Kahanim. The Lamachin is Gayer. He did a conversion. So why does he need to do a conversion? His mother's Jewish and his father's not Jewish. We know that your Jewish status is determined by whether or not your mother is Jewish. So why did this fellow need to go through a conversion? That's what the Ramban asks. So he quotes the Tzarfatim, which is, in our Chumash, it's quoted in the Cheskuni, or I think maybe the Hardas Kaina. But the Ramban is quoted in the Tzarfatim, the Frenchman. He means the Bali Tosfos. The Bali Tosfos wanted to say that until the giving of the Torah at Sinai, our Jewish definition was defined by our mother. Before the giving of the Torah at Sinai was defined by the father. Only after the giving of the Torah at Sinai was it defined by the mother. Why? Because before the giving of the Torah at Sinai, we were all non-Jews. Since we were non-Jews, we were defined by our father. When we became Jews, then we were defined by our mother. That's what the Tzarfatim, the Frenchman, wanted to say. Look at the bold section of the Ramban. I totally disagree with that. As soon as Avram entered the covenant, HaYisrael, we were already a nation of the Jewish people. We were not counted as one of the nations of the world. In other words, we were a distinct nation from the time that Avram Avinu entered the covenant. Says something interesting about Esau. Yisrael Mumar Shani. The Gemara calls Esau Yisrael Mumar. So you see, even in the lifetime of Esau, we were already a nation. So the Ramban says Gir doesn't mean he actually went through a halacha conversion. Gir means to say he decided to stick with his mother as opposed to go with his father. Gir doesn't mean a conversion in the sense that we understand it. Gir could also mean that you can leave your your the country that you grew up in, Egypt. You grew up in Egypt. You identify as an Egyptian, and he decided to follow his mother. That could also be defined as gerus, but not the halachic gerus, not the halachic conversion that we refer to in today's day and age. That's what the Ramban wants to say. But you see that the Ramban is saying a very key point, that already from the time of Avraham Avinu, we were already a nation. Okay? B'bris Yisrael b'goyim leis chashavu. So this already opens up the petach, this opens up the understanding to the Ritzvah. The Ritzvah says that Sinai was the completion of the gerus. So what happened at Sinai? What was our status before Sinai? What was our status after Sinai? So I brought you from the Shir of Shmuel Rozovsky, who quotes the Granat. I didn't have to say for Granat, but I had to say for Shir of Shmuel. So I quoted it from there. Look at the bold section. This is there are two aspects to the Jewish people. One is the Mishpachas Yisrael, the fact that we are like a big, large family. Okay, we're a large family. There's a genetic connection between us. Without the genetic connection, we're still part of one family. Okay, we are a race, if you'd like, but we're a family. That's the word he uses, Mishpachas Yisrael. In addition to that, we have Kedushas Yisrael. There's a certain sanctity that a Jew has. Okay, so those are the two elements of being a Jew. So he says, when Avraham Avinu did the bris, we became Mishpachas Yisrael, we became a family, we became a nation. Okay, but when we stood at Sinai, we have Kedushas Yisrael. We assumed the sanctity of the Jewish people. Now, listen to this point. This is now a key point. Okay, some people have the mistaken impression that somebody could become Jewish if he just decides to become part of the nation of Israel. Okay. But we already saw the Gemara that says that a ger is going through the same oceans at Sinai. What happened at Sinai? At Sinai, we assume the Kedushas Yisrael. We assume the sanctity of the Jewish people. So in other words, if he says, if a non-Jew says, I'm going to be part of the Jewish nation, I'm going to identify as part of the Jewish nation, I'm going to go to a Reformed temple, or once a year I'm going to light a Hanukkah menorah, whatever it is, I'm going to do something to help me identify as being part of the Jewish nation. Okay, you maybe want to be part of Mishpachas Yisrael, but you need to go through the motions of Sinai. What happened at Sinai? We assumed the sanctity of the Jewish people. How did we achieve the sanctity of the Jewish people? As the Torah states, a holy nation. How do we become a holy nation? By responding to Hashem. Our sanctity is assumed by accepting upon ourselves the oath of mitzvahs. So therefore, a person wants to become part of the Jewish people. Today, we don't accept people into Mishpachas Yisrael. Today, we accept people to become Kedushas Yisrael. If you assume the Kedushas Yisrael, then we'll allow you to be part of Mishpachas Yisrael because Avraham Avinu is the father of Gabriel. Okay? So I hope that point is clear because it's a very significant point. Okay? So let's carry it a little bit further. We said that the Gemara Machar says that if somebody says, I want to become Jewish except for one thing, we don't accept him. The Gemara of Avodah Zarah was mashma that even the Eved is not a care. So this brings us to the Gemara in Shabbos Naflam Aleph. Tanarbana Maisa B'Nachar Echad Shelo L'Fei Shammai. Non-Jew came in front of Shammai and he wanted to become Jewish. So Amalei said, how many Torahs do you have? So Shammai said 2. Torah Shabbat Torah, we have the written Torah and we have the oral Torah. So he says, I believe you that the written Torah is from the divine. But the oral Torah, I don't believe that it's from the divine. I want you to convert me to Judaism, or to be a part of the Jewish nation, on condition that only have to observe the written Torah. So why did Shammai do? He kicked him out. What did Hillel do? Hillel converted him. So the first day Hillel taught an Aleph Beis Gimel Daled. The next day he reversed the order. The Ger asks, how can you reverse the order? So he says, if you believe me as to the order of the Aleph Beis, you have to believe me about everything else. Now there's a reward for the Messiah, a reward for the tradition of the Jewish people. We wouldn't even know the order of the Aleph Beis. Okay, fair enough. So says Rashi, Shammai, why did Shammai send him away? Rashi goes to the Gemara Machar Stam and Beis that we mentioned before. Right? Shammai said that if somebody comes to be Jewish, except for one thing, we don't accept him. So why did Hillel accept him? Says Rashi, I put it in bold, he was not denying the oral Torah. There was no denial here. He simply didn't believe that it comes from the divine. Okay? So on first glance it seems very peculiar. He says he wasn't denying it, he just didn't believe it. What's the difference between denying and not believing? The fact that he's not denying, he's just not believing, is that any better? What is Rashi explaining, right? So the Rambam, I have to elaborate a bit on this point. The Rambam in number 31 in your reference, right? There's a few forms of koif in the Torah. There are a few people that are considered a heretic for denying the authenticity of the Torah. The Rambam says, somebody who denies the trustworthiness of those that give the Masara. Says the Gemara in Herod Nafsad Mechtes Amud Aleph, Rabbi Hillel says, "Ein la Mashiach," so there's no Mashiach. There's no Mashiach. What does the Gemara say? Amr Yosef Shai Rabbi Hillel. No, this is not Hillel Hazaken that we saw in Shabbos. Amud Aleph. This is Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Hillel lived at the very end of the period of the Gemara, of the Amoraim. So God should forgive him. He said something heretical. Rabbi Hillel, he was one of the great sages of the Talmud, but yet he said something heretical. He said there's no Mashiach in Israel. Okay, so first of all, the Ram qualifies the statement. If you look in number 33 in the reference, he didn't mean to say that there's no Mashiach. He meant essentially, they won't need the Melech Mashiach to conquer the enemies of the Jewish people. That's what he meant to say. Okay? So he wasn't denying that there's going to be a future redemption that's written extensively in the Divrei Nevi'im. He just was denying that you need a human king to defeat the enemies of the Jewish people. Says the Chasam Sofer, nobody's allowed to come along and say that I maintain the same opinion as Rabbi Hillel, because the consensus of Chacham that came after Rabbi Hillel said that he was wrong. Okay, so if you now deny the consensus, or you don't accept the consensus of Chacham after they already determined that Hillel was wrong, so then you're being machash magidiyah, and then you have the status of a man. Says the Rabbi, similar idea, right, number 35 in the reference sheet. Let's read that. Hillel Adam Gadol was a very great man, but he actually made a mistake about one of the fundamental philosophies of the Jewish people. Because he made this mistake, he didn't have the status of a kofar. Right? Rabbi Hillel is still quoted in the Gemara, so obviously he wasn't a heretic. If he was a heretic, they wouldn't be quoting him in the Gemara. But he simply made a mistake. He thought that he's saying the truth. He thought that this was the emes of the Torah. He thought that this was the truth of the Torah. So what is a kaifer? A kaifer means to say that I know that this is divine, but I don't care about it. Okay. Or a min, Rashi says kaifer. It means to say he really sees the authenticity there, but he convinces himself, or he tries to fool himself that it's not true. But if somebody genuinely tried to determine the truth, and he made a mistake, even if it's about one of the fundamental philosophies of the Jewish people, he doesn't have the status of a kofar. I think the Sefer Ikrim from the Yosef Abu is one of the Rishonim put it the best. Okay, number 36 in the refugee. He told Ha'iyun, if your examination mistakes you about something, lahachish ha'ikr, to deny one of the fundamental philosophies of Judaism, li'yosef chashav she'midas bari tachrir chatar lamina, you'll think that something that's fundamental is not fundamental. He thinks that if he interprets a miracle not to be a miracle, he believes that that's not called heresy. Right? He doesn't believe that you have to believe in miracles according to the Torah. He's a kafir. He's not a kafir. He could even be one of the great sages of Israel. He can be even one of the pious men of the Jewish people. Because he's simply making a mistake in the process of his examination. But he's making a sin inadvertently. But he needs to be atoned for. So that was the same thing. That's what Rashi was saying. Rashi was saying that he was fully ready, this ger that came in front of him. He said, I'll accept everything that's divinely handed over to the Jewish people. I'll accept the full corpus of everything the Jewish people are observed to believe in. He made an honest and genuine mistake that the Torah Shalom is not part of it. Okay? So what you need to say, his Kabbalah's omniscience was complete. He says, I'm ready and waiting. I'm fully committing myself to observe everything that the Jewish people need to observe. I'm fully committing myself to believe everything the Jewish people are required to believe. He made a mistake. He thought that they don't have to believe in the Torah Shabbat. Eventually he was shown the right way. So did he fulfill that which Am Yisrael did? Kol Shadiv Hashem Nase? Yes, he said. in his own way. He said, Kol asher divar Hashem naseh. Everything that God commanded me, I'm going to do. He thought that the Torah Shabbat is not something God commanded to do. So somebody could become a ger as long as he undertakes the Kol asher divar Hashem naseh. Everything that Hashem is, that is the Ma'aseh Gerus. That's the Mahusa Gerus. That's the Mahusa Gerus. That's the essential act of Gerus.
It's a pretty big loophole.
Yeah. But it has to be an honest mistake. And it becomes a little bit nuanced, right? But it's still it's a very fundamental nuance. Okay? There's a difference between somebody who says, I acknowledge that the Torah Shabbat and the Torah Shabbat comes from the divine, and I'm only ready to take on the Torah Shabbat. So then he's not fulfilling Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh. But if he only believes that the Torah Shabbat is genuine and the Torah Shabbat is not genuine, he's making a very great error, but he's still fulfilling the act that we did of Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh. Okay, so it's a nuanced point, but it's still very fundamental.
What's interesting is that we would be Megayer him, and after he's a ger, work on...
Hillel did that. So the question is, we're going to get to soon, right? We're going to get to that point already in Reish Shamachas. The Beis Yosef says, the Gemara says, we're not Megayer people unless they're going to be good, upstanding Jews. So why was Hillel Megayer him? Quotes the Gemara in Menachos Daf Mem Daled about a certain woman. She was a prostitute and she had an incident with a yeshiva bacher who was Misgarv al Yetzer. He ended up overcoming his Yetzer. She was very impressed and she wanted to become Jewish. So Rabbi already suspected that maybe she's becoming Jewish because she wanted to marry somebody. But in the end, Rabbi did convert her. So the Beis Yosef, based on Tosfos, says that the Dayan has to use his own intuition to see whether or not this person is going to become an upstanding Jew or not. Okay? Now, don't make the mistake. Some people think that Kol She'en of Dayan Reis means they say, okay, my intuition is he'll be eventually a good Jew. No. There's one thing that's not given for any compromise. There's no compromise about the fact that he has to say, Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh. Right? The Gerus, as the Gemara increases that test, is a doing the motions of Sinai. He's experiencing Sinai as we did 2,500 years ago, whatever. Okay? So there's no compromise about it. He has to say Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh. Okay, now what if he's denying half the Torah? He doesn't believe that half the Torah is genuine. So then the Dayan uses intuition. Is he going to get back on the right track or not? So Hillel trusted his intuition that he had the Kabbalah's own mitzvahs. He said Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh. Hillel was allowed to rely on his intuition that he would get back on the right track. Okay? So the idea that Beis Yosef says in Reish Shamachas that it died, I'm repeating myself because I think it's important, the idea that the Beis Yosef says in Reish Shamachas that the Dayan could trust his intuition is not to accept ger they don't have a real Kabbalah's own mitzvahs. It's to take somebody that has a Kabbalah's own mitzvahs and to use your intuition to trust that eventually he's going to keep all the mitzvahs and he's going to be a good, upstanding Jew. Okay, number 5 on the reference sheet. Similar idea, not exactly the same, but similar. This comes from the Shut Achiezer Chel Gimel Simcha Vav. Now this, Achiezer has been very misunderstood, and a lot of people that are proponents of the idea of Giyur, to be a Masarti, to be a traditional Jew, misunderstood this Shut Achiezer. Now, says Achiezer, near it, the dins of the Nach Shabbat is Ger L'Kabel Olav Kol Mitzvahs. Okay, first of all, Chaim Rudensky is very, very clear. We have this Nachar, we have this non-Jew. First of all, he's being Makabel Kol Mitzvahs. He's accepting upon himself to do everything that the Jewish people as a nation are required to do in the framework of the bris, in the framework of the brit, the covenant that was made at Sinai. Okay? He says, you know what, there's one chumrah, one stringency that I don't want to keep, and the Kabbalah, so we don't accept. And he says, I'm not going to keep this. Shaving with a razor, I can't do that. That's not for me. I have to continue shaving with the razor. I'll become Jewish, but I'm not going to give up my hamburger. Okay, that I can't give up. The Gerus is completely invalid, and the Kabbalah said, he says there's no such thing as being a half a ger. It's either everything or nothing. Either you completely commit, either you say Kol Asher Dibar Hashem Naseh, or it's nothing. The people said Kol. The people said everything Hashem commanded us to do, we're going to do. So there's no gerus l'chatzah, says. Avol Misha Makabel all Kol Mitzvahs, if he really is accepting all the mitzvahs, Rak Shabedai Telabel Te'avim, he's expecting to be overcome by the Yetzer Hara and mess up with certain mitzvahs. Ein Zeh Chisaron B'din Kabbalas HaMitzvahs. That's not a detraction from his Kabbalah mitzvahs, because he's saying, I'm going to be over l'te'avim, which means to say, I really do accept upon myself all the mitzvahs, But I know that in the future my Yetzer Hara is going to get the better of me and I'm not going to keep a certain mitzvah. So it's a nuance, and it's not such a complicated nuance. Rabbi Chaim Grodensky says very clearly, he's makabel kol mitzvahs, but in the future he knows he's going to be over l'te'avon. He knows that the Yetzer Hara is going to get. What does it mean he's been makabel? It means he acknowledges and he recognizes that he's fully obligated to do every mitzvah. He has the she'ifa, he also has the desire and the goal to keep all the mitzvahs. He just knows, he has the aspiration to keep all the mitzvahs, but he knows that there will be an extended period of time, perhaps even till the day he dies, where he won't be able to observe a certain mitzvah because of his Yetzer Hara, because of his temptation. Okay? So that doesn't mean I'm accepting myself to become a Masorti. On the contrary, the Masorti and the traditional Jews in Israel, many of them actually believe that the entire Torah is divine. But they said it's too difficult for us to keep all the mitzvahs, so therefore I'll accept just doing certain mitzvahs better something than nothing, which it's true, it's better to do something than nothing. But they acknowledge that everything is from the divine. So somebody says, I'm going to be a Masorti, I'm not Jewish now, I'm going to become a Masorti. Well, being a Masorti could mean that you acknowledge that everything is divine, but you're going al das, you're going with the intention that you don't accept a certain mitzvah. That's very problematic. You have to have the real aspiration and the desire and the hope that eventually you'll be able to keep all the mitzvahs. It's very important. Okay? So this Shudach has been very misunderstood. People understood this to mean that the te'avon, that means to be a Masorti. On the contrary, the Chaim Grodensky said he was makabel all of the mitzvahs. Number 38 in your reference sheet, one of the things that we tell a ger, we tell him about the punishments. There are repercussions to violating the Torah. Why do we need to tell him about the repercussions? Because a person, when he goes into the bris, into the covenant of being Jewish, the covenant of Geirus, he has to have an aspiration to fulfill all the mitzvahs. He can't do that unless he's aware of the repercussions. If you're aware of the repercussions, that could generate within you an aspiration to keep all the mitzvahs. Number 39 in the reference sheet. The next point that the Achiezer says, when the Dayanim know for absolute certainty, he knows with absolute certainty that he's going to violate prohibitions of the Torah. He's going to desecrate the Shabbos, he's going to eat non-kosher food. We know with absolute certainty he's not being genuine. He says, yeah, I'll become Jewish, but inside it's very clear to the Dayanim that he's not intending to do anything. That's a compelling proof, right? Even if he says, I'm accepting the mitzvah, it's worthless. So you see, the Rabbi Chaim Grodensky, the Achiezer, was the biggest opponent of Gira Masorti, this idea of becoming Jewish just to be what they call a traditional Jew. Now, one of the things that Malamed quoted was the Shut Piskei Uziel, number 40. Says the Piskei Uziel, this was the Rishon LeZion, Mitzvah l'kal b'ger v'geiros, afa b'sheidei l'anusha l'kam kol ha-mitzvahs, he said, if you know that eventually they're going to get there, then you can accept them. Which means to say, becoming a fully observant Jew is a very long process. In fact, most Jews are in that process. Every Jew really is in that process because we're constantly trying to improve. So in other words, observing all the mitzvahs is a lifelong mission. And it's something that happens gradually. So he said that you accept the ger. In the beginning, he's going to mess up a lot. Right? There's many things he's not going to do right. But says the Mishpatei Uziel, the idea is that we know eventually he's going to get there. Now, let me ask you a very simple question. If we assume it to be reasonable that eventually he's going to get to basic mitzvah observance, that means he has the aspiration to do it, right? Somebody's not going to get to anywhere if he has no intent to get there, unless his intents change. But remember that the intent at the time of the Geirus is what defines him as Jewish or not Jewish. So I think that the Piskei Uziel, on the contrary, is a proof against the idea of Gira Masorti. In the end, he's going to eventually get there. He's basically saying something very similar to Chaim Grodensky, if not maybe the same thing. In the next paragraph, it says, if the person is Christian and he's still holding on to his Christian beliefs, then obviously he's not Jewish. Okay? Number 41 on the reference sheet, He has to display a love of God and a love for the Torah of Israel. If somebody has a love for the Torah of Israel, there is certainly an aspiration within him to fulfill everything that's written in
the
there.
Geras can't be based on some other...
Right, so if there's, so what if there's ulterior motives? Okay, so that's the next section. Now we get to the section of ulterior motives. Do you accept a ger with ulterior motives? Okay, we're going to go a little bit over time because of the late, so I apologize to the people who have to leave now. I don't want to leave, I don't like leaving the reference sheet undone. Okay, so this is the Gemara Yevamah Staf Chavdalid. This was last week's Staf Yovi. A man was suspected of having had an affair with a slave woman or a maidservant. He was suspected of having an affair with a non-Jewish woman, but this guy, and then she becomes Jewish. He's not allowed to marry her. Got that? He's not allowed to marry her. We're going to have next year. I wanted to discuss why you have so many people, Jewish men living with a non-Jewish woman, or vice versa. One of them becomes Jewish and they get married. How is that allowed? According to all the places, it's not allowed, but we do it anyways. Okay, that's going to be next year. Okay, there's a very famous diora I'm not going to say it on air, but kind of the same idea. I think she was living together with a Jewish man, and then she became Jewish, and then they married. Okay, but according to the Mishnah, it's not allowed. So the Gemara says, "Hagi arli hava." The Gemara there in Yevamah Staf is medayik, which means that they're not allowed to get married after one of the spouses become Jewish. But the gerus is still valid. The Gemara says, why is it valid? It was an ulterior motive. They became Jewish so that they could marry this person. So the Gemara says that that's the opinion of Rabbi Nechemia. But if you look at the bold section, Amr Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Marta Mishmei Rav Halacha, the halacha follows Kedivrei Ha'ayim Kulim Gerehem. We rule that even if somebody becomes Jewish with ulterior motives, we're not allowed to accept them Chachila. Ideally, we're not allowed to accept them. But if they were made Jewish, then their gerus is valid.
But that ulterior reason becomes usher.
That's right. The ulterior motive makes it usher to accept them as a ger. But if they were anyways accepted as a ger, then
once they become a ger, whatever that ulterior motive was, that they can't follow that. If they became a ger, they marry somebody. They can't marry that person.
Exactly. They became Jewish to marry somebody. The halacha says you can't marry with Shishum Laz. We'll see next year all the Rishonim, the Ramban, the Tosefta, Rashi says something different. We'll discuss Rashi. But the Ramban, the Rajba, the Ritzvah, the Mukiyesi, they all say, because everybody's going to say, not really Jewish. She's not really Jewish. She just became Jewish because she wanted to marry him. That's a very bad situation. We don't want people, we don't want somebody who did a gerus, who did a conversion. We don't want everybody whispering behind their back, or his or her back, that it wasn't a genuine gerus. Okay? That's why we don't let them marry after she becomes Jewish. Okay?
But Rob, there are cases where they've done it.
Yeah, they have not many, but thousands of cases that it's being done.
And some have been very successful.
Yeah, exactly. Some have been very successful. But strictly according to the halacha, the Tosefta says it explicitly, that if a Jew has been living with a non-Jew, a man has been living with a non-Jewish woman, after she becomes Jewish, they're not allowed to marry, because then everybody's going to be whispering behind her back, saying that she didn't really do it genuinely. She just did it so that you can marry this fellow.
Or she's not living, but they're dating.
Oh, they're dating.
It's
okay. You're right. I wonder if it's dating. The Gemara says nitan. If there's rumors, the Gemara discusses in it's a little bit. The Gemara says what constitutes a rumor.
Jared Kushner and Ivanka
Trump
were dating for many years, and then
I wonder if they were living together or not. I don't know. Were they living together?
I don't know.
All right. So, anyways. So Rashi says one of the people that we don't accept as Geirim, as Avdei Shlomo, the servants of Shlomo, the servants of Shlomo were very prominent people. Or another example is somebody became Jewish because of the fear of lions. We're going kusim to Sefer Malach. Rashi says the kusim. Okay. The conclusion of the Gemara is kulam Geirim hey. According to Rashi, the kusim were real Geirim. Even though the kusim became Jewish because they were afraid of the lions. But b'di'eved, after the fact, their gerus was valid, and we're going to discuss it next year, or maybe if we have time, maybe we'll discuss it. Anyway, let's see how much we can cover. It says in the Gemara, Kedushin Daf Ayin Hey, Rabbi Shmuel Savar Kusa Gerayosem. Rabbi Shmuel held that the Kusim, the Samaritans, they were not real gerim, they only became gerim because of the lions. Rabbi Kiva says, Kusim Ger Emes, and no, they're genuine gerim. Machlokes Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva. Number 45, Rabbi Kamatz, Machlokes Reb Meir Reb Yehuda, Reb Meir holds that the Girei Emes, that the Samaritans are Jewish. The Gemara in Sanhedrin brings this Machlokes. Rashi there in Sanhedrin Pei says, V'hem Kenachim Gamim, according to the opinion that the Girei Arayos, that they only became Jewish because of the fear of the lions, they're really Goyim. So after all the Rishonim, we have an open stira between the Gemara in Sanhedrin Pei and the Gemara in Chav Dalet. The Gemara Chav Dalet says if somebody became Jewish with ulterior motives because he was afraid of the lions, b'diavad that he is Jewish. The Gemara Pei the Rashi says explicitly they're not Jewish. Okay. Another peculiar idea. The Gemara Chulim Davav. The Gemara Chulim Davav says that they made them into Goyim. Look at the bold section. Halach Rabbi Yevo. We see with Rabbi Ami Rabbi Aschi. Rabbi Yevo told Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Aschi that the Kusim are not behaving well. They're very bad people. They made them into Goyim. Okay?
Can you rescind Geirus?
Very good. So there's a Chasam Sofer like that in the Tefillin. We'll see the Chasam Sofer. According to the Chasam Sofer, if the Jewish people as a whole get together, they're able to rescind the Geirus. It's a tremendous chiddush of the Chasam Sofer. Okay? Well, I feel bad going overtime. We started late. That's why I'm letting us go a little overtime. I feel sorry, but let's see what we can do. Okay, so Tosfos asks the stira. So Tosfos Mecharesh that there are two types of Girei Arayos. Okay, the Ritva and the Nemukhe and the Rajba, they expand a little bit more. They say, what's the type of Girei Arayos that's okay? I put it in bold. That Agav Unsai Gom V'Kabel. Somebody could have been afraid of the lions, but when he became Jewish, he had the absolute full intent to observe all the mitzvahs.
What are lions?
Sorry? But how does it say from Allah and the Kus and the Samaritans were being attacked from lions? They were looking for refuge. So they came to the Jewish people and they said, we'll become Jewish, and that's the way they received refuge, and they were therefore no longer attacked by the lions. So they had ulterior motives to become Jewish. So which means to say like this, according to Tosfos, the Ritva and the Nemukhe and the Rajba, there are two categories of Girei Arayos. One is a category where it's done with ulterior motives, either to marry a Jewish person, to gain a position of prestige, to be saved from the lions, but there was a genuine and absolute acceptance to do the mitzvahs. That's the way these Rishonim were. The Haggadah Mordechai seems the same thing. If we see that they became Jewish with ulterior motives, but you see that they're behaving like good Jews, that proves that they really did it genuinely. They had ulterior motives, but they really did accept upon themselves the mitzvahs.
The Tosfos in Yevamos, if you look at the rest of what you have here, it says that the Mad Yomer that holds that the Girei Emes holds that they were Messiah a second time.
Messiah, right. Shuv Nizgaya L'Gamri, correct. And Chanami, which means to say,
was it that there isn't really two classes originally? There isn't a wall.
I accept that. Yeah. The Sefer Yosher Rabbeinu Tam brings this opinion. Rabbeinu Tam denies this reality that would be two categories of Gerim. Rashi also clearly holds there's no two categories of Gerim, because Rashi and Yevamos Namdalat said the Kusim were the same Girei Arayos that were discussed in Yevamos Chav Dalet. Furthermore, the Rambam says that even if somebody becomes Jewish, number 55 in the reference sheet of Gimel Yitzayim, even if somebody becomes Jewish with an ulterior motive, even if they don't behave, even if they start to misbehave, they're considered a strong number. We don't rescind. Right? The Tosfos Yom Tov in Nida, Parak Mishnah Daled, says that the Rambam in Perish Mishai says that the Kusim after the Gemara Chulin Daf Mem says Asok Goyim. They made them Goyim. Says the Rambam, that means even if they die in a room, there won't be Matar Boil. They won't spread ritual impurity by being under the same roof as something else. That's something that only exists with Jews, not with non-Jews. So says the Tosfos Yom Tov, I can understand that you can make somebody that's Jewish, you can treat him like a guy l'chumrah. If he's in a courtyard, you have to be safer, you have to rent his property. But how do you make somebody, how can you rescind a gerus such that the tumah of impurity doesn't spread? How does that work? So that's the Chasam Sofer in Siman Lamed number 58. According to the Chasam Sofer, Nimnu V'Goro V'Hoitzim B'Bris Yisrael V'Gamri. If the Jewish people collectively agree, they're able to rescind the Jewishness. There seems to be you can understand the Shita of the Rashbash that way.
What does that mean? That is it the Rabbi B'nai Yisrael?
Yeah, the Sanhedrin.
So it's the Sanhedrin.
Because the Sanhedrin act as a representative of the Jewish people. The Rashbash says, Asoka Goyim doesn't mean that there was a retroactive revelation that they were never Jewish. It means that they made a gzeira to make them not Jewish. Okay, so you see that according to the Rambam, right, they actually rescinded the gerus. According to the Chasam Sofer understands that. According to the other Rishonim, there are two types of gerayos. There's the kuseim that right from the get-go never actually really accepted the mitzvahs, and then there's the other type of gerayos that when they accept the mitzvahs, they do it with full intent. But anyway, it says the Shulchan Chiezer, and I'm going to finish up with this. It says the Shulchan Chiezer, if there's no real kabbalah on mitzvahs, it's called an umda demuchach, okay, which means to say you can't say dvarim shebalein and dvar. One of the arguments, when I finish up with this, I apologize for the overtime, one of the arguments that they wanted to make is dvarim shebalein and dvar. If somebody has musings in his heart, we don't accept it. Okay, we don't reckon with simple musings of the heart. So someone to say, if somebody says in Beis Din, I accept the mitzvahs, even though the musing of his heart is that I'm not accepting the mitzvahs, so they wanted to argue it doesn't matter. Says the Chaim Moshe, it doesn't work that way. Look at the bowl. The etz in number 60 of your reference sheet. The etzem kabbalas ha-mitzvah geras hadvarim shebalein. The essential act of converting to Judaism is an act that takes place in your heart. It's an act. It's not an act. It's a mental, emotional commitment. So you can't say, we ignore the emotional and mental. No, this is a mitzvah that's defined by the emotional and mental reality. Okay? So you can't say it's like, I want to do tshuva, but I'm saying I'm doing tshuva, but I'm not doing tshuva. No, the act of tshuva is the emotional and mental commitment. So it's the Dvar of Ram Brudensky. Also says that Beis many achronim. You can look at the last print of the Be'er of somebody one of the Chabad Rabbanim collected all the poskim. It covers the entire spectrum where the Kabbalah or mitzvahs has to be genuine. If it's not genuine, then there's no essential act of gerus. Tomorrow this will continue this year the next week. Okay.
I have a shir next week.
Is there going to be a shir? I did.
We'll get an email that will confirm it or not confirm it.
No, I mean there's a share schedule. If you can make it.
There is one scheduled for
there's a share schedule.
And Rabbi, you discussed can a Beis Din revoke individual...
no, not today. The Sanhedrin, according to the Chasam Sofer and Simulam Tesnar Chayim, the Sanhedrin were able to revoke.
Because there have been cases where sometimes they wanted to revoke.
Well, that's what we saw in the Gos Mordechai. Rush would very quickly that if somebody converted with ulterior motives, and then you see right away that he's not observing mitzvahs, according to the Gos Mordechai, it's nothing. It's a retroactive revelation that the whole thing was never genuine. Like an ekvatos. According to the Rambam, not really. According to the Rambam, you still have to be choshesh that maybe he's shown more. Okay?
Thank you.